Hello, welcome to my channel. If you've visited my channel before, welcome back. I wanted to explain two things that I've covered in my past very recent videos. I wanted to talk about Dramatica and I wanted to talk about my cross-dressing project. Uh, and it gives me a great opportunity to explain Dramatica further because I think it's a theory that I wish more people were at least aware of. For those of you who don't know what Dramatica is, please check through my recent videos for more information, and I'll explain a little bit about Dramatica right now. It's a theory of narrative. It's a theory of of how we tell a story. It's a theory of how the mind works in order to tell an argument in a story or through narrative storytelling. And of course, it's been applied mostly to movies. It was developed by two college students. They had made one film together. It was so-so. It was sort of basically a well-done college film, I believe. Came out around 1980, and they decided before to uh, to study and figure out how to make a better movie before they actually went about making another movie. And then and I'm being very vague and oversimplifying of all this. Before they did that, they decided to meet again in 10 years and experience life in the meantime. So they got back 10 years later. This would be about 1990, and they conferred together and figured out this model. It's a model, well, all right. It's a model based more on psychology than all the screenwriting books, and they did explore a few screenwriting books, but they purposely avoided all the minutia of what the books had to say. Really, they went on their own approach, examining how the mind works through a problem, and the theory rests on the basis or rests on the premise that a movie or any story is really the mind working through a problem from four different perspectives. And we experience those four different perspectives through the main character's eyes, and then there's an impact character that challenges the way we, through the main character, think the problem should be dealt with. And then there's an objective story arc, which features sort of on a global scale all the different characters working through some conflict. And then there's the relationship through line arc, which involves characters' relationships with each other. So there are many levels of resolution and conflict for each of those arcs, and then there are four dynamic questions. This is the model that they figured out. I'm jumping ahead of myself a little bit. All right, so they excuse me. So they figured out the theory, and they designed the software, and the software can be bought. You can purchase it on Dramatica.com or wherever you would find it. It has a story engine. In the story engine, you see four main character questions or four main character dynamic binary questions. In other words, you choose this value or this value for one of the main character elements. And there are also four objective story binary values or binary questions. You choose which of the two binary possibilities. Besides that, you have, as I said, four through lines, and each through line has four different levels of resolution of a conflict. And of course, at each resolution, it's expressed thematically as some kind of conflict. Like, for example, at the very bottom, the tiny resolution, the actual problem in the conflict for that through line may be actuality, and the solution would be probability. I'm just making this up. And then a level above that, within the same through line, would be more thematic. It would be perhaps self-interest. Conflict arises from moments of self-interest. That through line is exploring conflict of self-interest. Then above that, conflict could involve obtaining. So, and then above that, it would be physics. So altogether, that through line may be expressing a conflict involving physical activity that revolves around obtaining, where the true problem, the meat of the problem, involves self-interest, and actuality is the true actual point of conflict. I hope you get that. I hope you get what I'm talking about. So there, those four through lines, each one has those four different levels of resolution. All right, so this is a dynamic story engine where if you pinpoint where the conflict is in one of the through lines, the computer software calculates, it's constantly calculating. The more information you put in as to what you want the conflict in the story to be, or what factors you want in the story, in other words, as you decide certain things you want in the story, it calculates the rest as best it can, and it tries to fill in as much as it can if there's only one possibility. In other words, if there's more than one possibility, it can't automatically fill in some of the other stuff. If you answer one of the if you pick one of the two values for something, and there can only be one value that causes something over here to have only one value, it will then automatically fill that in for you. Okay, hope that's clear. So let me get to the meat of this video, which then dovetails into my cross-dressing topic, and specifically how women think, as opposed to how men think, typically, stereotypically. Let me explain the four main character questions, and then I'll skip the four objective story questions because they don't really relate. The four main character questions are, one of them has two values, start or stop. Another one is approach, meaning doer or beer. A third one is linear or holistic, and the fourth one is changed or steadfast. Now let me explain what these are. The changed or steadfast is perhaps the easiest to explain. And this relates to the impact character, which is a whole separate arc. Remember, this is the main character. Changed means that towards the end of the story, you will notice that the main character decides to take a leap of faith, so to speak, and go about a different approach or a different possible resolution to his or her personal problem. That's changed. Steadfast means that throughout the course of the story, he has maintained a certain guess that he's correct in how he's dealing with his problem. And that could be, he could wind up feeling good at the end or feeling bad at the end. In other words, it could be a good decision that he remains steadfast and sticks to his guns and goes about it the way he thinks is best. Or it could turn out that he should have become a changed character and decided to make a leap of faith, so to speak, and switch to this alternative way of dealing with his personal problem. Doer or beer is relatively easy to understand. That's the main character approach. Uh, Doer means that the main character prefers to resolve his conflict through physical activity in the outside world. A beer doesn't mean that he's passive or anything like that. A beer means that he prefers to adjust himself mentally. Uh, Actually, drinking or alcohol is actually a form of, even though it's a physical activity, it's a form of rearranging your mind. So it would count as a beer type of activity. He decides to change his attitude, his mood. He drinks, or he decides to do something mentally to adjust to the outside world in order to keep himself calm, or keep himself okay. Whereas the doer decides or prefers to change the outside world so that to adjust to him so that he would feel okay. That's doer or beer. Start or stop. A start character. Now this becomes more complicated because it relates to changed or steadfast. Start or stop. Now a start. Okay, let me explain vaguely. Start simply means that something is holding out or continuing, and in order to be resolved, in order for the conflict to be resolved, it must rise to the occasion, so to speak. And a stop, main character, stop means that something must stop happening for the conflict to be resolved. This is all about resolving conflict. Now, if it's a changed main character that starts, you're waiting for that character himself, because he will he will eventually change at the end. That character will be seen to gradually start doing something that should resolve his conflict. In other words, he's starting, or you're waiting for him to start doing something to resolve his conflict. A changed stop character, you're waiting for he himself to stop, or that that he must stop something in particular, and that's because he himself is a changed character. Now, if the main character is steadfast, then he will not change. He will reinforce his suspicion that he's on the right path. He's doing it well. He's going to resolve. If he continues doing what he's doing, it will resolve his problem. So he's holding, in a start steadfast main character, the start aspect means that he is holding out. It's a good example would be a screenwriter. I'm on the path. I'm writing screenplays. I'm writing stories. I'm sending them out to producers. I'm doing this. I'm constantly doing this. I know, because I'm steadfast, I'll hold out. I'm waiting for them to recognize my success and start giving me accolades, or start noticing me. They're going to start noticing me eventually, as long as I continue in my steadfast effort to send out screenplays. Now, a stop steadfast character, I'm trying to remember actually what a stop steadfast character would be. Steadfast means that he would not change fundamentally from how he's approaching his personal problem. That would mean that he's holding out for something to stop. All right, so that explains changed or steadfast. That explains doer or beer. That explains start or stop. Now I get to the fourth question, or the fourth binary choice, which is it was called something originally, and then it was changed to eventually it was called mental sex. You could also call it mindset, because the main character's mindset has a direct correlation with the unveiling of events and the ordering of events in the story. Because remember, the author's mind is the one ordering the events in the story, and the main character is the audience's view, and perhaps many times the writer's point of view as he or she is telling the story. So the order of events would tend sort of I'll be mild and just say tend to follow a certain order, whether it's holistic or linear. Now, as I understand it, the original terminology was male or female. Basically, question asked, does the main character think like a man or think like a woman? Then it got, from what I've read, it got weird reactions and people didn't understand it well. All right, okay, fine. So they changed the terminology to logical or emotional. I don't really like that, because I'm a man, but even I would think that a woman would have certain female logic. I don't like that logic versus emotional. So they then changed it to linear or holistic, which I think is probably closer to the actual concept. And I've explained this in a prior video, a recent prior video. Let me see. What was that? Linear. Linear tends to be with men, and holistic tends to be with women. Even though there have been interesting switches. Like, it's been written about a few times that in the X-Files TV series, Mulder thinks holistically like a woman, and Scully thinks linearly like a man. There's also another interesting thing, kind of a side note, but it talks about the linearity and holisticness. When Wonder Woman was coming out, or there were announcements about Wonder Woman coming out, I was wondering about a certain aspect. Will they make Wonder Woman linear thinking or holistic thinking? Now, she's a woman, and of course there was fanfare, a female superhero. Yay for women. However, there's another aspect of Dramatica which recognizes that, or it posits that. All right. Before I'll finish that in a few seconds, I've got to explain another aspect. There's something in the storytelling itself in Dramatica called the limit, the story limit. There's option lock, or time lock, and I see this as related very much to linear or holistic, and I'll explain why. The story limit is the sense that you get that as the story progresses and there's a goal, how close are you getting towards the climax? In other words, if the goal is to obtain 5 pieces of silver, through the story, you may see a character get a piece of silver. Okay, he's got 1 piece of silver. Okay, then later on, okay, he's got 2 more pieces of silver. Okay, so now he's got 3 pieces of silver. You know that there are 2 pieces left, and once he gets 4 pieces, the climax is probably going to kick in, because now you're getting towards the climax where there's going to be probably a struggle to achieve the goal of getting 5 pieces of silver. That's the story limit. It could either be a certain specific amount of time. It can't be just when something happens. That's not a time limit. It's a specific amount of time where the clock is running. You've probably heard about the ticking clock. That relates to this. But it's a specific time. You've got 48 hours to free this person. As it approaches the 48th hour, the climax will kick in. There's real pressure to accomplish the goal. You better do it. You've got 10 10 minutes left. You got half an hour left. You get that sense of urgency towards the end. The same way there's an option lock, the same concept, but it's not a specific amount of time where, sand is dripping, dripping, dripping or whatever. It's more like you've got, like as I said before, you've got pieces of gold. You've got several different things that must be dealt with. And as each one is dealt with, it's like that's check marked off. Okay, now we've gathered everybody together. That's check marked off. Okay, not only must they be gathered together, but they must be trained and well armed. Okay, that's check marked off. Okay, now that we've got an army gathered together and well trained and armed, now they've got to go off and find their adversary. Okay, that's another element in this option lock. So you can understand you've got these different things that have to be dealt with, and you can sort of, by logic and understanding the situation, you can tell we're reaching that one final element in the option lock. The climax is that's a signal that the climax is just about to begin. Like we're on, as they're heading out in their helicopters, this has got to be the climax. You're moving toward the final battle or whatever. And somebody actually pointed out that if you take an old style timer where there are particles of sand dropping, and once all the sand has dropped from the top to the bottom, somebody pointed out that's actually not a time lock, that's an option lock. It's the particles of sand, because you could easily shuffle the particles of sand around. So it's not a fixed amount of time, a fixed duration of time that you're talking about. So even that is an option lock. I thought that was interesting. Okay, so now I get to audience attention. What segments, what demographics of the audience are you likely to entertain or engross in your story? If you have a linear main character, remember the main character is the audience's view into the story. If you have a linear main character, the male members, usually the linear thinkers, usually the men, will easily identify. There's something about emotion. You can empathize and you can sympathize. Empathize means more like you bond emotionally. You can understand the feelings. Sympathize, you acknowledge what's going on and you can follow along, but it's not as tight of a bond. All right, a linear main character will have the male members or the linear thinkers in the audience emotionally tied in, like they know, they can feel, they can emotionally understand what the main character is going through. The holistic thinkers or the women can understand sort of objectively what's going on, but there won't be, as the way the theory goes, they won't emotionally bond as much with a linear thinker. Likewise, if you have a holistic main character, holistic thinker main character, the men will watch and acknowledge what the woman is doing. I'll just say men and women, what the female main character is doing, but the women will really bond and emotionally understand closely what the female main character is thinking and worried about and doing, and just like with little effort, there's little resistance. I guess really you're talking about resistance. The men will feel some resistance trying to emotionally bond with the holistic main character and vice versa. All right, then I'll talk about option lock. I was talking about before with a time lock or an option lock. I'm sorry, the story limit, option lock or time lock. Now, if you have a linear main character, the male members of the audience will bond emotionally with the male main character. If it's in a time lock story, wow, you've got them because of their linear thinking. They're thinking dot to dot to dot to dot linearly. Time elapses dot to dot to dot to dot. So they can really understand you've got 48 hours and you've got this cop that thinks in a linear style. The male members will be perhaps be engrossed, be a successful film. However, the women or the holistic thinkers in the audience won't be able to identify as much emotionally with the linear main character, and they may think that the linearity of the story limit is perhaps too boring for their taste. Likewise, if you have a holistic main character, the male members can't really identify that much emotionally with the main character. And if you have an option lock as opposed to a time lock, they're very attuned to relationships and how things relate to each other. I'll just say relationship wise, like this option lock and this, it's more spatial. Like you've got this thing and this thing and that thing and that thing, and they all have to be accomplished. It's more spatial as opposed to time based or temporal. So you would tend to get a chick flick. You would get a holistic main character that the women can really identify with emotionally. They can also appreciate all the different relationships. In other words, you get a chick flick many times. In other words, if the holistic main character has to deal with this boyfriend, I'm sorry, I'm being really stereotypical for a moment, but has to deal with this boyfriend, and then this other guy likes her, and then what does she do about this other thing over here? These three things have to be dealt with in an option lock. Plus, she's a holistic thinker, so she'll be going back and trying to adjust spatially all these relationships to get the best resolution that impacts all these things in the best way. Like she's trying to adjust the different spaces so it comes out the best that she can get it. However, the men will be thinking, "Oh, come on, just finish. Come on. Where's the time is going by? Just like they're looking for that sense of time. Like get on with it. Just resolve that. You've already dealt with that. Just go on and do something else." And they can't really identify with the holistic thinker. This brings me back to Wonder Woman. Would you have a, and I should say actually that I tend to like movies with a linear main character and an option lock for a story limit. And I'm going to make a guess that most movies are ones with linear main characters and option locks. Now, what would they have done with Wonder Woman? As that was coming out, I was wondering, what would they do? Will they have a woman, Wonder Woman portrayed with a female mind, a holistic mind? That would turn off a huge segment of Superman fans, Batman fans, the whole DC universe. You've got all these men and comic book, young comic book guys that were collecting these comic books and grew up. You've got all these men in comic book Comic-Con and so forth. You've got all these men going to see a movie where the main character thinks like a woman. They won't be able to bond emotionally as much with her. They'll be able to see it and acknowledge what's going on. Would you have her be a linear thinker? In which case you get a lot of guys, a lot of linear thinkers being able to understand and emotionally bond and follow her thinking process. It's all about thinking process. They'll be able to follow her thinking process. And also have an option lock that gets the women appreciating and liking all the spatial relationships amongst things that have to be dealt with. That's what they did. They had her be very linear thinking. Like her impact character was Steve Trevor, and when she leaves her island, she says, "Okay, take me to the point of World War One. I want to go there and I want to conquer the villain." And Steve Trevor is, I believe, thinking more holistically. No, 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 no. It's not that simple. What about this? You've got to take into account that, and there are consequences for this. And no, she's saying, take me straight to here, and I want to do that, and then we'll have victory. No, 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 no. Even though there have been arguments about whether an impact character must have the same mental sex or mindset as type as the main character. It's been pointed out in those Dramatica analysis sessions that you can listen to on Dramatica.com and on YouTube under Jim Hall's YouTube channel. Jim Hall is the correct Jim Hall is the one with a circle around it that's cut into quarters. Those are very fun to watch and listen to, just in a comedic sense alone, as they try to analyze these and apply the Dramatica theory to various popular movies. It's been said there that impact characters often exhibit characteristics of the opposite mental sex type. So I could see Steve Trevor reacting and pointing out holistic thinking. He's pointing out all these various things she's not taking into account. I just thought it was very interesting. She was very linear. Like when she goes in, was it a castle or something? She wants to get rid of the female doctor the female scientist working with poisonous chemicals. She walks straight in. She grabs her sword and it's like she's saying, "Take me straight to this doctor. I want to kill her." It's like, no, they're in a masquerade ball. It's like she doesn't care. She's just walking straight through, down the hall, straight in. She wants to kill the scientist. And if I don't remember, but I can imagine Steve Trevor saying, wait a minute, you're going to cause a commotion. Think of all these different people. Think of the commotion you're going to cause, which will then hinder your efforts. Anyway, I hope that's clear. So I'm still divided myself personally on whether the impact character has to be opposite, or whether it should be or can be opposite from the main character's mental sex. Okay. After having said that, I think I can go to the other part, which deals more with the thinking like a woman. Now, let me explain who Jim Hull is. All right, so in Dramatica, a little bit of history of Dramatica. As I said before, Melanie Ann Phillips and Chris Huntley developed this theory, and they were already in touch with Stephen Greenfield, who ran a computer software company, and that's what enabled them to produce and mass market this application, this piece of software. Now, Jim Hall had a blog. I'm unclear as to how he began before that. I know they had been doing analysis sessions, and a number of people got involved and thought the theory was wonderful, and they got there. These were the first people to get exposure to the theory. And Jim Hall started up a blog. I believe it's now called Narrative First. I think it had been called something. I know it was called something else before that. This is how I discovered Dramatica exists. He had this blog, and it's a great blog. He's not telling me to endorse this. I'm just saying this is a wonderful illustration if you want to understand how Dramatica works. It showed me a lot. He would simply take a facet of the theory and illustrate how illustrate how it works, illustrate what it's all about, using moments from movies as an example. And that's what he did in his blog. And then he now has a website with the well, it's called Subtext, subtxt.app. And the reason I was hesitating for a moment was because the .app implies it's some kind of application, but you go to it as a website. So it's subtxt.app. And of course you sign in and you pay for a certain subscription fee for a year and so forth. But it's well worth it. And that's how I got I got information to write down these notes. Now, the reason why he started this whole separate website, was to translate Dramatica as a theory into something more applicable for writers. Now, an earlier author had written a book trying to do this. It was essentially like for the same reason that other screenwriters have written books, how to tell your story in screenplay. So you want to make a movie. Here's how you write a movie. So he was a fan of this earlier guy. I can't remember his name offhand. He's Hispanic. His name escapes me at the moment. He was an enthusiast of Dramatica. He had sat in on the sessions, and he wrote a book applying Dramatica so that Dramatica users could then use it to specifically write screenplays, how to write screenplays well using Dramatica. All right, because Dramatica can be used as a writing device to write your own screenplays, or it can be something to understand and appreciate movies or narratives that you've already seen or read. It can be used either way. To depart for a little bit, there's something that Chris Huntley mentioned that I appreciate a lot. It explains something about the power of Dramatica, explains why Dramatica is so good. Imagine eating a cake, a piece of cake, a slice of cake. You really appreciate the cake, and you think, wow, that's really good. Anybody should be able to bake a cake. Okay, from just tasting that slice of cake, now figure out how to do it. Figure out the recipe. That's the tricky part. So there are consumers who watch movies or watch television shows, and they think, oh, well, anybody could just write a show, but actually sit down and actually figure out the elements to it. It's much more difficult. You have to have a different kind of mindset or mental approach to it. You're not consuming it anymore. You actually have to produce something new. And in order to produce something new, you have to understand the tools that you're working with well. All right, so out of that, so back to Jim Hull. He also wanted to create something that was more user-friendly for screenwriters and storytellers rather than story consumers. So he created this, still using, he's applying the Dramatica theory. He's not coming up really with anything new other than shifting terminology and creating other things that draw from the Dramatica information. He's making it more accessible. He is also shifting the terminology to better, to those terms that he thinks better describes the actual concepts. The concepts haven't changed. It's a terminology that Chris and Melanie struggled to come up with that best describes the concepts. It's sort of like you have a model of something. You have like a diagram or a model of something. Words, in some sense, don't even apply. You're seeing this thing, and you're trying to describe it, you're trying to find English words that best describe what you're seeing. It's like they know the concepts are the same. They're trying to find the English words that best match it. That's what I'm saying before. I was saying before about mental sex. They had, I think, some term before mental sex, and they start off with, I think, male or female, and then that caused controversy. People didn't understand what they meant by male or female. Like they could get confused. Could a If you're writing a main character who's a man, does he have to think as a man? Can he think like a? It all got confusing. So they took gender out of it, and they just changed it to rational or logical versus emotional. Well, no, that doesn't really work because there is a such thing as female logic, and that implies that men can't think with their have emotional reactions and whatever. So then they shifted it to linear versus holistic, which seems to be closer to that space-based way of dealing with something or thinking versus the linear based way of thinking, which comes closer. So in that sense, Jim Hall has done stuff like that with the theory, where he has shifted terminology in some sense back to what they originally had, or tried to find something even closer to the actual concepts that Chris and Melanie developed. So, so here's something interesting in his. This is the best way of putting it. So in Dramatica, you don't have one premise. You don't come up when you're calculating a story form for yourself, or you're trying to calculate what's the premise of the story. Like, say premise like, if you do good things will come back to you, or something or other. What's the meaning of the story? What's the message, the moral message of the story? Something like that. What do you learn? What do you want the audience to learn from the story you've told? He wanted a simple premise, and Dramatica didn't have that. It could tell you thematically, like all right, you've got four. Okay, remember, you've got four through lines, and each through line there's a thematic level describing what the type of conflict or the basis for the conflict for that through line is at four different levels of resolution. Remember, I said at the top physics. It involves physical activity. It also involves obtaining something. It involves obtaining something where there's conflict involving characters who have self-interest involved, and then there's a problem underlying that, and there's what they think is the problem underlying that. So imagine that for each through line. Well, there's no one central thing that you can write or identify. The Dramatica story form can't give that to you. So Jim Hall came up with this formula, or system of various formulas, to let the writer employ what's probably in his head. What he or she is probably thinking is, I want to tell a story that tells the audience, well, if you don't give up on your dreams, you can accomplish anything. There's nothing in the Dramatica form that can let you plug that in as the story you want to tell. You can put in fantasy, you can put in disappointment or something as a theme in the objective story or something. There is no way of putting in just a premise. So he figured out formulae, or a way of what I call formulae. It's like a formulaic list of expressions where you can plug in like character problem here, goal here, and it'll read like a sentence, more like something you can think in terms of English. I'll give you examples. Some of these are keep and then blank when dealing with the world around you, and you can blank, and I guess that blank, I didn't put it in here, but I'm guessing that blank would be achieve the goal, whatever goal you're going for. Keep resisting. Here, I'll read these off. Keep focusing on blank and you can blank. Now keep in mind, as I've said, that blank, I didn't write it down here because I've already written it down in my other notes, and so I didn't bother writing these down. I was more focused on this, which is the female list of, or holistic list of formula sentences. But these blanks would have stuff like problem or goal or theme or something like that. And he identifies which one of those things goes in each of these blanks. Keep focusing on blank and you can blank. Keep blank when dealing with the world around you and you can blank. Keep adapting to the world by blank and you can blank. And then down here, abandon blank and you can blank. It's probably something like abandon your own personal thing, hang up, and you can achieve your goal, probably. All right, so these are all the linear thinker sentences. And they're about, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10 of them that I have listed here. And it's further broken down. First of all, it's broken down into only the linear thinker ones, as opposed to the next page. On the next page, it's the holistic thinker ones, which is actually a longer list. Ha ha ha. And they're further broken down into what he calls maintain or abandon, and that's his terminology. That's closest to changed or steadfast, if I remember correctly. And then the final part, he has triumph, virtuous, or bleak. Now, that relates to, that's a shorthand version of saying something that's actually two elements in the Dramatica story form. In the Dramatica story form, there are two different elements in the objective story questions. Remember, I talked about the 4 main character binary choice values. Well, there's also a set of 4 for the objective story, and it's, after I mentioned these two, remember there are only 2 other ones, so it's a very easy thing to understand. One, in the objective story, one of them is whether the goal of the objective story is successfully achieved or it's a failure. That doesn't mean that it has no relation to the main character. Simply, objectively speaking, is the goal that you identified for the objective story accomplished or not? The second question is whether the main character, I can't remember exactly how it's phrased, it's like, do you feel happy at the end or do you feel sad at the end? And it's really tied in with the main character because you're experiencing the story through the main character's point of view. So it's kind of sidestepping between really something the main character, is the main character in a good place or a bad place? Does he feel sad or feel content and resolved? And it's also sidestepping in with the objective story. So you kind of, it's like, are you leaving the theater feeling sad, or are you leaving the theater feeling happy and content? I'll give you a good example. In First Blood, which is, I'm not talking about First Blood 9 or something. I'm talking about the Rambo 9 or something. I'm talking about the original First Blood movie. It's a movie in which, let me see, a Vietnam vet wants to eat food, and he's kicked out of town that he's visiting by the sheriff. And the sheriff just goes, all right, he's kicked out. He said, the sheriff essentially says, I don't want to see you in this town. Go 30 miles down that way, just to grab a bite to eat. And the Vietnam vet turns right around, walks back into the town. He barely gets to the outskirts, the entryway into the town. The sheriff says, "All right, you're under arrest." He really treats him rotten, and he drags him into the jail. I don't know if he reads him his rights at all or whatever. He drags him into the police station, and then through a series of PTSD moments at the police station, Rambo just says, "I've got to get out of here," and he kicks the police officers, throws one out the window, kicks the other ones, steals a motorcycle, and just heads out into the woods. So for the rest of the movie, the sheriff employs, it's almost comedic. The sheriff, it's like a drama and comedic farce at the same time. The sheriff employs his deputies who are actually, I think literally, they have a weekday job. This is like an off thing. They're the National Guard, I think. They they work at the pharmacy or whatever. This is like a side job for them. He employs them to chase after Rambo. He gets this fixation about capturing Rambo. Okay, so at the very end, Rambo is cornered, and he has a soliloquy with his superior officer who's been called in to help capture him. And he says, he just goes sad, and he's depressed, and he hasn't been able to get a job, and he hasn't been able to hold a job, and he has these nightmares for the past 7 years, blah, 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 and he's crying, he's crowded, a real big moment. And in the original novel, I think he shoots himself. I think he gives his gun, or does something with a gun. In the original novel, as I understand it, from what I remember, his superior officer shoots him out of mercy, puts him out of his misery. In the movie, they may have filmed it that way, but as I understand it from what I read, Sylvester Stallone decided to change it and filmed it so that they show the sheriff taking him, I think, in handcuffs. As the credits are about to roll, they take him, the sheriff is escorting him off to presumably jail and then prison and so forth. Trial probably there somewhere. So he's in a bad place. Rambo is unhappy. What are the binary choices for the main character? It's good or bad. So it's a bad story because clearly you're following Rambo. You're watching the movie. You're experiencing the movie through Rambo's eyes. So he hasn't resolved his problem. He's still having nightmares. He's crying. He'd just been crying a moment ago. He's being escorted off to prison, presumably. So it's bad. However, if you think of the goal as capturing Rambo, the sheriff would be the protagonist. The sheriff is pursuing Rambo. By definition, according to the Dramatica theory, the sheriff is the pursue character. I don't even want to describe it in terms of protagonist. Characteristically, the pursue character can also be called the protagonist. That fulfills a different function from the main character. That's one of the big differences between Dramatica and other theories and other screenwriting books and the common conception people have. It actually defines terms. The pursue character pursues the story goal. The antagonist or avoidance character, as you can tell, prevents or avoids the achievement of the goal. So Rambo constantly is avoiding capture by the sheriff, and the sheriff is pursuing what I take to be the story goal, which is capturing this. Remember, you have to think in objective terms. You have to ignore what Rambo is going through personally. You have to ignore emotionally what you're bonding with Rambo about. What's objectively going on? You have a sheriff chasing after a fugitive Vietnam veteran and trying to capture him. So at the end, I would call it a success story because the sheriff has successfully captured the Vietnam vet and achieved the story goal. And the main character, Rambo, is in a bad bad feeling, as they call a bad place. So I would call it a success bad story. Okay, so that's in Dramatica terms. Jim Hall changed it to triumph, virtuous, and bleak. Uh, triumph would mean that you have a success, good story. Virtuous, if I remember correctly, is a failure, good story. And a bleak story, of course, would be a failure, bad story. Ugh. Oh, not necessarily ugh, but you've got a main character not feeling so good. He hasn't resolved his personal problem, and the objective story ends in failure. So let me get back to these notes that I've taken from Jim Hall. So what I did was organize this into this list of formulae, the formula sentences of premises. Um, First, by whether it's reason or linear. These are the linear ones, and then I flip the page, and these are the holistic formulas of premises. Then it's further broken up into these top two, which are labeled as maintain, which would be steadfast, and then these ones, abandon. Actually, there's a maintain down here. So there are three groups of steadfast linear thinker premises, and there are three changed main character linear thinker premises. Then there's a third category that further breaks it up, which is whether it's triumph, virtuous, or bleak. Okay, that works fine until you get to the holistic thinker category, these ones over here. And that's where Jim Hall realized something. Uh-oh. And of course, I have to mention that he has a girlfriend who stepped in and helped him with the holistic aspect, because as he explained, I believe in one of his blogs, he had, like many linear thinkers, he had a difficulty really understanding what holistic entails. And I have had sometimes, especially early on in studying Dramatica, I've had difficulty being certain or uncertain really whether this character is really holistic thinking or linear thinking. Sometimes I've thought and made a guess, oh, it's a linear thinker or holistic thinker, and then during their analysis session, it turns out to be the opposite, and then the computer program, the predictive software of Dramatica, calculates it and says the main character has to be linear or has to be holistic based on other aspects that you've plugged in. It calculates the whole thing. I'll finish this, and then I want to say something interesting about Dramatica, that calculation aspect of Dramatica, in a moment. So Jim Hall found, particularly in the movie, with the movie Juno, I mentioned this in an earlier video, he came up with this premise. He plugged in, story goal and whatever it was, main character issue or something like that, and assuming a linear thinker, or he was plugging it into his formula, and even though she's a holistic main character, he was using linear phrase, he was using premise phrases, premise formulas that applied to male linear thinking approaches or ways of thinking, ways of experiencing a movie. And it came out, I don't remember how it came out, his premise came out, but it was something like, if you abandon something something, you will achieve something something something. It was something like that. Anybody watching Juno doesn't walk away with feeling like that, like walk away with that as a message. Didn't seem to fit the feeling of the movie, even though he did it correctly. He plugged in the story goal and the interest, or the theme and so forth. It didn't fit the feeling you get with watching movie. So then he developed these ones that are holistic. This is now getting to what I wanted to talk about in this video. I'll read you off these premises. This is something that I'd like to understand better. It should help me understand holistic thinking better. They're all relationships, so that's the first category here. The second one, grow or adjust, which is a holistic term, two holistic terms that draw from what the Dramatica story form calls, I think it's changed or steadfast. But in the theory or the interpretation of the theory, linear thinkers dwell more on achieving the goal. Holistic thinkers dwell more on the experience and fulfillment. I think it's fulfillment. One is satisfaction, one is fulfillment. One wants fulfillment, one wants satisfaction. I think the holistic thinkers want fulfillment, and I'm pretty sure the linear thinkers want or seek satisfaction. Anyway, grow versus adjust. It's the same thing. It's just that he changed the terminology to make it sound more holistically centered. But it's still drawing from changed or steadfast, that same concept. It's as close to holistic thinking as as Dramatica can be. Then the final part is whether it's transcend. Now here's the really tricky part. He doesn't have success or failure. He doesn't have, remember that other one, it's in the linear thinker, it's either triumphant, virtuous, or bleak feeling that you get at the end. He has here transcend, present, disconnect, stagnant, composure, which is, I think, a variation of something. I think composure is an extra part that should fit in another category. Or disconnect. Now, let me read these premises, and then they're further broken down into stop and start, as I put here. But let me read these premise formulas or formulae, and you should get an impression of the difference between holistic and linear. I'll go back to linear. Keep focusing on such and such, and you can such and such. Keep resisting the outside world by such and such, and you can such and such. Virtuous are those who such and such by getting out of their own way and such and such. This seems very goal-oriented. While severe, you can such and such by such and such. Abandon such and such. Like, I think that's abandon your own personal problem, and you can achieve the story goal. Now, here are the holistic ones. These are the growth. These are the growth ones, which I believe would be what Dramatica proper calls grow, adjust, steadfast. These are the steadfast / grow, transcend ones. Being in harmony with blank allows your issues with blank to help you heal and transcend. Here's another one. Blank distorts your issues with blank while helping you heal and transcend. If you're a linear thinker, try and wrap your mind around that instinctively. Do you think instinctively in those terms, or do you think instinctively about achieving and getting rid of something that you don't need, abandoning something in order to achieve your goal? These are the ones that are under stagnant. Grow, stagnant. I mean grow as in grow as in steadfast, and also the ones that are stagnant. Blank keeps you present while building resistance through blank. And here's blank keeps you from growing, allowing blank to challenge relationships. Certainly holistic. It's not linear thinking at all. Here's one's grow, so we're still in grow, and here disconnect, which is some feeling of how the story ends. In Dramatica linear thinking terms, remember that's success, failure, or good, bad. Success good or success bad, stuff like that. Here it's like stagnant, disconnect, present, composure. Here's the ones for grow, stagnant, or grow, steadfast, stagnant. Blank keeps you present while building oh, I already read that. Here's the ones for disconnect, allowing the uncertainty of, and then in the blank, whatever the story consequences, disconnects you from the outside world, clouding your MC, I think that's main character problem, with shades of impact character problem. Wow. Here's one for composure. Allowing your blank to balance out your blank addresses blank. Address blank by balancing your blank with your blank. Opening yourself, and then here's one for present. Opening yourself up to main character, I think that's problem, manages objective story issue while sending you down the path of becoming more present. What does it mean? Intellectually, I can sort of understand what being present in the moment feels like, but it's still hard for a linear thinker to instinctively think. Being in harmony with blank allows your issues with blank to keep you present. Okay. Victimizing. Okay, then here's the ones that are listed under disconnect. So it's adjust, which would be the equivalent of what Dramatica calls changed, and it's disconnect. Victimizing yourself with the uncertainty of the objective story consequence disconnects you from the outside world, clouding your, I put element here, I'm not sure which through line's element that is, with the shades of, and then element. And then allowing the uncertainty of element, or uncertainty of blank, disconnects you from the outside world, clouding your blank with shades of element. Which sounds something like the other one, although I differentiated these with stop and start. These are, by the way, I didn't go through which ones are start and stop because it would be more confusing for a video like this to explain, but I did differentiate them. So I'm not sure if you can read that, but that's how I divided them up. Just to see, first of all, how many there are total. I'm not sure if I have all of them in total, just because I just listed all possible variations, and then under those, as I was going through Jim Hull's listing of the different movies, feature films, real movies, and the premises that popped up if you go through the Dramatica software and then apply those elements that it found into his formula for the premises, you get the. It's a way of phrasing. It's a way of phrasing the story form and parts in the Dramatica report that you get once it's all the Dramatica thing has been calculated for a particular movie. You know which value, you know how to read it, you know what you're looking for, and you know it's a tool. You're thinking, you're dealing with a linear thinker, so you go through, it must be one of these premises with the formulas. Or if you're a holistic thinker, of course, it's not going to be one of these, it's going to be one of these, and then you further fine-tune it to find out which one best fits this premise. I don't feel like I'm expressing it well enough. What I'm trying to say basically is that this is not just simply a pick and plug in. It's more like the Dramatica theory well, so you know which formula phrase, phrase like which formula, which one of these best fits it, based on whether it's start, stop, and changed or steadfast, stuff like that. So I hope I've been clear. So my whole thing here is using this to understand what holistic terminology is, to get, like, so when I'm cross-dressing and I'm trying to play a role of Samantha, to get into the mindset of what stagnant feels like, what being present feels like, what feeling disconnect. It's all about, it seems like in here, the terminology that Jim Hall chose to better fit the mindset of a holistic thinker, and his girlfriend helped him a lot with this. Once she started understanding Dramatica, she said, "Oh, let me, help." Well, so many words she said. Let me help you, and he credits her with a lot, with helping him a lot to understand this. It deals with not with abandon or achieve or success or whatever. It's more like disconnect, stagnant, in the moment, feeling. He mentioned something else. I didn't put it in the notes there, but it's like vibration. For a while, he was wondering if he should use vibration as part of the terminology, like you're vibrating at a higher level or a lower level, or you're disconnected from what's going on in the present moment. It's more like that. So I want to understand that better, so that I can portray and like think more instinctively, put on like an instinctive shell of Samantha, how she would think, rather than how I would think as a linear, inherently linear, instinctively linear thinker. All right, so I hope you learned a lot about Dramatica. There's certainly a whole lot more to learn. It's a full-fledged theory, and actually, Dramatica, as it has evolved and exists as a theory, is only half, or really 1/4 of the total theory. The theory itself says that it's only half, or really 1/4 of the total theory. It's amazing that it can even say that it's saying, wait, there's much more, and it clues you in on kind of what other aspects of the theory are left to be filled in. In other words, okay, here, I can explain this easily. You have dynamic and you have structural. Dynamic means that things are progressing in real time. They're shifting, they're changing in real time. And structural just simply refers to a structure. It's like a wave and a particle. The particle is a structural way of looking at something, and the wave is like a dynamic, or like a fluid, a moving way of looking at something. So Dramatica right now is a structural part of the theory that deals with structure. We also need to figure out the dynamic half of the theory, which would, okay, so here, which would involve degrees and levels and intensities. So, all right, so the theory and the software can predict what is going on. Like in the fourth act or the fourth quarter of this through line, you're going to experience characters obtaining something, or there's going to be a focus on obtaining something. But by how much? At this point, you're going to experience self-interest as a theme, but to what degree? What level of intensity? That's what the other half of the theory would be able to give us, would be able to show. It will not only tell you what it is, but how much, like to what degree. Then there's the structural of the structure, and then there's the dynamic of the structure, and then there's a dynamic of the dynamic, and then there's the dynamic of the structure and the structure of this. You know what I mean? There are four it predicts that since there are two of them, there's either dynamic or structural. In total, there must be four of them: dynamic of the dynamic, dynamic of the structural, structural of the structural, structural of the dynamic. However, you get the idea. So they've had inklings about what the dynamic, what kind of a chart, what would they be dealing with? How would they illustrate this dynamic part of the theory? And it deals perhaps in wavelengths, frequencies, using that terminology. I think somebody suggested the Euler beta function, if I remember correctly. And Melanie has also suggested, since this theory works on fours inherently, that perhaps we need to move beyond trigonometry into quaternometry, and we may be able to understand a lot about physics and mathematics that we don't currently understand. I think she even, as I recall, she even goes into relativity theory, understanding that a lot more, and was it the concept of negative time, negative imaginary numbers, which is real, which is, imaginary number. Here you have positive integers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Here you have 0, and then you have 0, negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. So in mathematics, you can get negative 5 seconds or negative 20 seconds, depending, it depends on the math, but you get weird things popping out like that, which people call imaginary, because they identify, and it's illustrated with a little lowercase I. It's like it fits the math, but it doesn't seem realistic. Like, we don't know the concept of negative mass or negative density, or like negative 20 negative 20 grams. I don't understand what that means. Intellectually, I can understand. I think possibly, well, all right, it's easy for me to intellectually understand negative 20 grams. As long as you've got a 0 in the middle, okay, it's in reverse. It's a negative version of what we understand to be in a positive mass universe. Maybe this theory will help lead to maybe we need quaternometry. Maybe that does exist. Maybe they will develop that, and we will be able to understand these concepts a lot better. All right, so anyway, I think I've explained it well, and I will go on to a new topic in a future video. So thanks for watching, and if you enjoy what I talk about my cross-dressing project, I talk about Dramatica, as you've seen both cases, and the channel is called Introspection with Jeff. It's about me examining psychology and how I understand myself better, and various things about my life that perhaps you can relate to. So if you like that, please consider subscribing to my channel, and I hope you will tune in again soon, hopefully in the next video. Thanks.